Here comes Robert. Robert Fraser is the President and Chief Scientific Officer of Molecular U. Robert,
All right. Well, thank you, Uli, Dr. Uli, for inviting me. I really appreciate the invitation. And as Uli mentioned, we've been conspiring to work together, and I see a lot of other opportunities to work together. And thank you all for joining us. I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing, but this is a very important topic. Um, so I co-founded this company called Molecular U, and what this history of Molecular U is I'm a scientist. My focus is in my career really been deciphering the causal mechanisms of disease and what are the underlying factors in biology. And so I've spent my career doing that, and recently I've been focused on personalizing that care. And as we got deeper and deeper into personalizing care, we found that the understanding the individual is the most important thing. So you can't really make decisions about an individual and how you're going to look after them unless you really understand what's going on. And so we developed this platform really that makes sense of the biochemistry, the biology of an individual, but then translate it in a way that makes it very accessible to the individual, the caregiver, and the practitioner. And so our goal is really enabling what we call predictive health or protective health, and making it simple so that people can really understand it. Now, I'll give you an example of that, and I think it's probably best we begin with an autistic child. This is a 9-year-old boy who has fairly severe autism. This obviously isn't him. And when we do the analysis, so our analysis is a proteome metabolome deep dive quantitative analysis, and I'll get into more of the technology, but you can see that we're very capable of, from this one test, to pick up all of the things that are going on in this individual that could be affecting his health. And so we do have a signature autism disorder, and I'll share how we came about that. But we also see type 2 diabetes. We see these common comorbidities all from the same test. We need one draw of blood, and we can look at these 280 metabolites and proteins that really give us that deep insight. But then we break it down into the biological pathways, which is even more important because now we're getting down to the root cause of what's going on. So we can see sort of the high level health risks for the individual. We call them risks because we're not diagnostic. But when we start to get into those pathways, that's when it really gets interesting. And so once we understand the pathways that are upset, we can start to come up with action plans. And these action plans can obviously be improved with a nutritionist or practitioner that can then use this information to come up with a very customized and careful plan for them. But the biomarkers that we're picking up are these drivers of inflammation, and we're seeing that the immune system being activated. We're seeing that fatty acid oxidation, which acts as a very big driver of these various immune systems. And the other thing that's fascinating is we're picking up a lot of metabolites that are being generated in the gut by the microbiome that are having an influence in that what we call the gut-brain axis. And so that influence, when it occurs at a very early stage, can be horribly damaging. So what our platform is a multi-omic analysis on a mass spectrometer. The mass spectrometer has huge advantages because it allows us to do quantitative analysis of multiple proteins and multiple metabolites or small molecules using the exact same method of detection. So we're comparing apples to apples all the way through. It also is very sensitive, and there's no amplification for the signals. So we're picking up the absolute concentration of these factors. And so when there's changes, those little changes can mean a lot over time. And so if we can pick up those changes early enough, we can bring them back into normative ranges. That information is fairly hard for the human mind to make sense of, but just by looking at the concentration. So we run that through our platform, we run our algorithms, which we've developed using AI tools, and to break it down into 12 areas and then 21 biological pathways, and then plus the recommendations. So right now we've got about an 88% predictive value across all of the areas that we look at, the health areas as well as obviously the biological pathways. Today we're at 288. By the end of next year, we'll be over 1,000 biomarkers, and we'll be expanding into additional areas as well. So this is what it looks like to the individual, either the practitioner or a caregiver or a patient. So we rank order the condition at the top. and a low score is a high risk. And so that's the biggest concern. Then that's broken down into pathways, and each one of the pathways gets broken down into biomarkers, and then each of those biomarkers can be addressed, and the pathways can be addressed by known methods. So it can be through lifestyle interventions like diet and exercise, which can be extremely effective, like we saw from Uli's work, but also we know that these changes will have benefits in certain cognitive factors. So this is the work that we started with. So we had a patient population, not a huge patient population of severe the affected autistic children. And this is what we call an ROC curve. So we plot our sensitivity over the selectivity and measure the area under the curve. And if you have a perfect accuracy, you get a 1. So it's a perfect rectangle. And you can see that we're very close to that. And what's really interesting about this curve is what's the biomarkers that build this curve are all associated with these key mechanisms that we know can be affecting the central nervous system. And if you can do this early enough and make those changes, there's an opportunity to change the course. But we don't know if this can also work with adult. And so these are things that, now that we know what we can measure, now that we have the tools to measure it, the next question is, how do we correct it? So our thinking right now, and this is just based on the small data set that we've got, is a lot of this originates from the gut, but there is this gut dysbiosis. And the frequency and the prevalence and the growth of autism can't be explained by genetics alone. There's obviously a genetic component. I think we all know that there's a genetic component in all of our health systems. But the gut is becoming a more and more important, we're recognizing the importance of the role. And maybe we always knew and we just kind of forgotten about it. Because we've gone different ways. But the microbiome can contribute phenomenally to our health. And we do know that there is this strong gut, brain axis, strong gut, heart axis, kidney axis. So the health of our gut can be extremely important. There's this disruption of the coagulation pathway. So that coagulation pathway is very important when you have vessels that are forming in the central nervous system. And that affects the vascularization of the central nervous system, so that if you want to give that brain enough food and oxygen to develop properly, so you get proper synaptogenesis, you need to feed it properly. And so not having angiogenesis can lead to many other effects. There's hyperinflammation. We know that. There's the immune overreaction. Those are things that we've measured already. The other thing that we're picking up is that there is this mitochondrial dysfunction, so that there's a low energy level in the central nervous system. It can also be somewhat related potentially to the lack of energy feeding into it, but it also seems to be something going on with the mitochondrial system. So we don't know how this all goes together yet, but I think over time and working with more and more individuals, we can start to understand and start to make better efforts in correcting. The other thing we're able to do, because there's so many great signals around things that affect our central nervous system, is that we can support adults with anxiety and depression. We know that anxiety and depression can really affect adults later in life, and that can actually be the leading cause of death. So managing that early on, picking up those signs early from a molecular level, even before symptoms occur, is key, because it's much easier to make those changes when we don't have the symptoms, because that means it's already well along. So picking up those changes and helping the individual avoid these. And we have the methods apply to other systems as well. The comorbidities, and we talked about this already, are huge. And from our single draw blood, we can look at most of the comorbidities associated with ASD. You remember that W also had issues with his gut, and those gut issues like inflammatory bowel disease, hyperinflammation, those kinds of things. That individual actually had liver issues as well, but that was primarily due to the medication. And so the medication was at the wrong dose, and it was affecting the liver function. And so that child has not been taken off the liver. So, but being able to do that all from one test actually has huge advantages, and you can continue to compare it over time. So we built a go-to-market value chain. We're established here. We're originally from Vancouver. We've now established ourselves in the US. So we can run the assays. We've got the kits. We've got the collection. We have a physician network to support this. So we can work together where anybody is across the nation. we have the phlebotomy, the cold chain. One of the challenges that we do have is that the metabolome is quite labile, meaning that it'll break down if left at room temperature for too long. So we need to get it frozen within 2 hours and keep it frozen until we can analyze it. And we need to take it on a fast to get that baseline where we know that there's nothing, you haven't eaten anything, because when you start to eat or exercise, things just start to go crazy with the metabolism. So we need it when they're rested and last part is really. Did I go overtime? Oh man. So I was just going to finish with this last little thing. So this is what we're hoping to do, is start working with the community and monitoring over time, because that's really where the power and these kinds of tools come from. So I'm sorry I went over. I promised I wouldn't do that. Thank you.